Some 70% of all the world's tropical and subtropical fruits come from plants that in the wild depend on bats for either pollination or seed dispersal. Now, I think I can rest my case about the importance of fruit and nectar eating bats. Let's go to those, the 70% that eat insects. These bats are coming from Bracken Cave. And I see Sarah here in the audience, Sarah Steves. Her parents were among the first people in Texas who helped me save this cave, which today is protected in a 2,500 acre nature reserve. But back in those days, nobody understood why in the world we'd want to save a nuisance like the bats from Bracken Cave. These bats eat an estimated, let's say about, nobody knows exactly how many bats are in a cave. Do you ever try to count 10 or 20 million bats? But let's say 10 million. At 10 million, these bats are going to eat approximately 100 tons of insects in a night. And they're not just going anywhere. On an average summer night, here's Doppler weather radar at 6:15 in the evening, showing them coming from 3 major bat caves. And what's this? This stippling over here is caused by crop pests coming off of agricultural lands. Look where the bats are going just 12 minutes later. They're literally going over and engulfing the area of crop pests. Back when we first discovered this through meteorologists who couldn't believe their eyes when they first saw it, Gary McCracken and John Westbrook, I convinced them to come down and do some research to determine what the bats' impact was in controlling crop pests. And back then, this shows what enormous opportunities are opening to us today, the next generation, to work on bats. This is 20 years or so ago. Back then, they had to have probably close to $1 million mobile radar unit on hand. They had to loft a $1,000 bat ultrasonic microphone thousands of feet into the sky, expecting never to see it again. Listen for bat sounds thousands of feet above ground, and they knew that if they heard the bats doing feeding buzzes just as the balloon approached the migrating incoming moths, that would be credible evidence that they were feeding on the moth pests. Today, we could achieve all those same discoveries at not even a tenth the cost. We wouldn't have to send balloons up and lose all of our equipment. We wouldn't have to have a mobile radar unit. All we'd have to do is have barcoding, gene typing. But what did they find? They found that there are literally billions of our most costly billion-dollar crop pests in America that migrate into Texas every spring from Mexico. Each moth is carrying 500 to 1,000 eggs. Just one of these bats can catch at least 20 to 40 of these moths in a night. Let's take this conservatively and say that it only does the 20 in a night. At that rate, it's still going to prevent 10 to 20,000 eggs from being laid. That's enough to force a Texas farmer to spray multiple acres of cropland at a cost of $74 an acre. I know that a lot of scientists still tend to lean toward going out and doing what they call basic research that doesn't have any applied value, but I'll tell you something. Gary will never be so famous in his life for any other discovery than making this one. And these are being made now around the world in part because of his pioneering work here in Texas. In fact, here's one of the more recent studies. In the Mediterranean, colleagues set up small bat houses around a 12-hectare plot of rice crop. And they showed that over a period of several years, they were able to attract enough bats to completely eliminate the need for spraying pesticides on those rice crops. Now, this does exemplify a really important point, one that I, if I had more time, would certainly make. Bats are a perfect first step in enabling us to restore biodiversity where we've ruined it with huge monocultures in recent past. Why are bats first most important in restoring diversity? Because, for example, the free-tailed bats we just talked about, they can fly thousands of feet above ground, catch tailwinds that speed them at 100 miles an hour to travel to distant places to feed out over large monoculture areas where other animals would no longer be able to feed. But if we don't at some point preserve some amount of biodiversity, you see this is natural forest over here. If that forest wasn't there, these bats would all starve to death between growing seasons for rice. They couldn't survive. So the bats are the perfect entree in getting people interested in restoring biodiversity. They can actually see what happens and measure it, and then it spreads to other things as well. Another study. This one done by B. Moss and Associates in Indonesia. They calculated using exclusion netting that cacao trees, when protected against so that bats couldn't come in and feed around them, lost a whole bunch of extra crop damage as opposed to the ones that bats could protect. They in fact estimated that the bat services were valued at approximately $780 million a year to the cacao industry. Now, again, that wouldn't be true, except cacao is often grown in association with native habitat in the vicinity, so the bats have alternative places to feed when they're not feeding on the pests of cacao. Now, with all these incredible new discoveries being made, one might expect that scientists and the news media would be communicating the great wonders of the world of bats and why they're so important. But I hate to tell you, there still seems to be more profit in scaring people about bats.